You were taught that blood means safety, that shared DNA is a shield, that the people who watched you grow could never be the ones who would sharpen the knife behind your back. And you believed it because believing felt safer than noticing the quiet moments when love felt conditional, when praise turned to comparison, when silence felt heavier than any insult. And this is where the real story begins. Not with hatred, not with blame, but with a truth most people spend their entire lives running from. The truth that the deepest betrayals rarely come from strangers. They come from those who already know where to strike. You've carried this longer than you admit, this strange tension you feel around people who are supposed to be yours, this sense that you must shrink, soften, explain, perform a version of yourself that keeps the peace while quietly costing you your soul. And you were told this was normal, that this is what family means: endurance, sacrifice, silence. But no one ever told you that endurance without boundaries becomes self-erasure, and silence without power becomes consent. There is a moment, subtle and easy to miss, when a child learns that love can be withdrawn, when approval can be traded, when belonging is conditional. And in that moment, something ancient wakes up inside you. Not anger, not rebellion, but vigilance. The quiet skill of reading rooms, reading moods, reading faces, learning when to speak and when to disappear. And you didn't call it strategy then, you called it survival. This is the forbidden door most people never open, because opening it means admitting that the people who shaped you also shaped your blind spots, that loyalty can be used as a leash, that closeness can be weaponized, and that the ones who know your fears best don't need to guess where to apply pressure. They helped install it. Machiavelli understood something that modern culture refuses to touch because it feels cruel, and because it sounds like heresy in a world addicted to sentiment. He understood that proximity is power, and power always creates temptation. Not because people are evil, but because insecurity seeks control wherever it can find it. And nowhere is control easier than in relationships where access is guaranteed and boundaries are blurred. You're not imagining this. The strange pattern where your growth makes some relatives uncomfortable, where your independence is reframed as arrogance, where your boundaries are labeled betrayal. Because when you change, you disrupt the unspoken hierarchy that kept everyone comfortable, and comfort, not love, is what most systems are built to protect. Family systems are not built on truth, they are built on roles, and roles are prisons disguised as identity. The responsible one, the black sheep, the golden child, the quiet one, the fixer, and the moment you step outside the role assigned to you. The system reacts, not always loudly, often softly, through guilt, through comparison, through concern that doesn't feel like care, through jokes that land just a little too sharp. You survive things you still don't have words for, moments where support turned conditional, where your pain was minimized because it made others uncomfortable, where your success was celebrated only when it didn't threaten anyone else's sense of worth. And you learned early that being fully seen was dangerous because visibility invites correction, control, and subtle punishment. This is where betrayal begins, not with a dramatic act, but with a quiet misalignment, when your evolution threatens someone else's identity, when your healing exposes their denial, when your boundaries reveal their entitlement, and instead of adapting, they resist. Instead of growing, they grip tighter, because letting you go means facing who they are without you playing your part. The first psychological shift happens when you stop asking, "Why are they like this?" and start asking, "What does my presence trigger in them?" Because jealousy is rarely about what you have. It's about what your existence forces them to confront, their regrets, their compromises, their unlived lives. And nothing activates that pain faster than someone who refuses to stay small. You're not broken. You were never taught another way. You were taught loyalty without discernment, forgiveness without accountability, connection without sovereignty, and those teachings kept you safe when you were powerless. But they become chains when you begin to grow teeth, when you begin to see, when you begin to realize that love without respect is just control with better marketing. Machiavelli would tell you this without apology. Those closest to you have the most to lose when you change, because they lose access, they lose influence, they lose the version of you that made their world predictable. And predictability is comfort, even when it's toxic. Notice the pattern, how strangers often support your growth more freely than relatives, how outsiders celebrate your wins without attaching conditions. Because they are not invested in keeping you frozen in time, they meet you as you are, not as who you were required to be. This is not about villainizing family. It's about seeing clearly, about understanding that love and power coexist. And when power feels threatened, love is often the first thing sacrificed, not out of malice, but out of fear. And fear is the oldest motivator in human behavior. Here is the hidden threat no one warns you about. The danger isn't open hostility. It's subtle sabotage. It's the discouraging comment disguised as concern, the doubt planted gently so you don't notice it growing, the constant reminding of who you used to be whenever you try to become more. Because if they can keep you doubting yourself, they never have to confront themselves. You feel it in your body before you name it in your mind, the tightness when you share good news, the hesitation before expressing an opinion, the exhaustion that follows every interaction where you had to explain yourself, justify your choices, defend your growth. And this exhaustion is not random. It is the cost of living in an environment where your evolution is treated as a threat. This is the moment your life begins to make sense, when you realize that distance is not betrayal, clarity is not cruelty, and choosing yourself is not abandonment. It is alignment, and alignment always disrupts systems built on suppression. Machiavelli understood that power is not about domination, it's about position, about knowing where you stand and who benefits from you staying there. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. You start noticing who supports you when no one is watching, who respects your boundaries without punishment, who celebrates your independence instead of resenting it. It's okay to feel this, the grief, the anger, the relief, because awakening always comes with loss. The loss of illusions, the loss of innocence, the loss of relationships that were only stable because you were silent. And silence, once broken, cannot be restored without cost. You are allowed to want more honesty, more respect, more space to become who you actually are, not the version that kept everyone else comfortable. And as this awareness settles in, something shifts, not loudly, but deeply. A quiet recalibration where you stop seeking permission and start observing patterns. The predator-prey dynamic begins to reverse here, because awareness is a weapon. And once you see the game, you stop playing it unconsciously, you stop offering access without reciprocity, you stop explaining yourself to people invested in misunderstanding you. And this is where the real journey starts, not toward isolation, but toward sovereignty. There comes a point where denial stops protecting you and starts imprisoning you, where pretending everything is fine costs more than admitting something is wrong. And this is where the core revelation begins, not as an explosion, but as a slow, almost merciful collapse of the story you were told about loyalty, family, and what you owe simply for existing within a bloodline. You start to notice how often your empathy has been used against you, how your patience became an expectation, how your silence was interpreted as agreement, and how every time you tried to step back, someone stepped forward to pull you back into place, reminding you of sacrifices, of history, of everything they've done for you, as if debt were the same thing as love. This is where many people feel shame for even thinking these thoughts, because they were taught that questioning family is betrayal. But what no one tells you is that refusing to question is how betrayal survives unchallenged, hidden behind tradition, obligation, and the threat of exile. Pause here for a moment and look inward, not at them, at yourself, at how much of your life has been shaped around avoiding conflict rather than pursuing truth, at how often you swallowed your instincts to keep harmony, at how many times you felt something was wrong but convinced yourself you were overreacting, too sensitive, ungrateful. You're not imagining this, and if this realization is stirring something uncomfortable in you, that's not weakness, that's awareness breaking through conditioning. And awareness always feels disruptive at first, like standing up after sitting still for too long. If this resonates, if you feel that quiet recognition tightening in your chest, let yourself acknowledge it. Not publicly, not performatively, just honestly. Because the moment you admit this to yourself, even silently, the power dynamic begins to shift, and you are no longer entirely available to be controlled by guilt. There are small emotional moments that start to surface once you stop numbing yourself. Memories you brushed aside suddenly replay with new meaning. The joke that wasn't a joke, the advice that felt more like a warning, the comparison that lingered longer than it should have. And these moments arrive not to torment you, but to inform you. You might feel anger for the first time, not explosive, but focused. Grief for the version of you that tried so hard to be good, to be easy, to be lovable enough to earn safety. And this grief deserves space, not because it makes you weak, but because it marks the end of a lie you no longer need. There is also relief here, quiet but profound. The relief of realizing that the exhaustion was never because you were flawed. It was because you were carrying emotional weight that was never yours to carry, managing dynamics you didn't create, maintaining peace at the expense of your own nervous system. You may notice your tolerance changing. Conversations that once felt normal now feel draining. Obligations that once felt mandatory now feel optional. And this is not selfishness. It's recalibration. Your internal compass adjusting after years of being magnetized by other people's needs. It's okay to feel this, the confusion, the sadness, the strange calm that follows, because this is what happens when you stop fighting reality and start aligning with it. And alignment always brings both loss and clarity in equal measure. You walk into familiar spaces now with different eyes. You feel the shift before a word is spoken, the subtle tightening in the room when you don't immediately comply, when you don't overshare, when you don't rush to fill silence or smooth tension. And you notice how quickly some people grow uncomfortable when they can no longer predict you. You feel it in your body, the way you sit straighter, the way you pause before responding, the way you choose not to explain yourself. And this quiet change speaks louder than any confrontation ever could, because systems built on control depend on your predictability to function. You notice who leans in with curiosity and who pulls away with resentment, who respects your new distance and who tries to guilt you back into closeness. And this observation becomes data, not drama, information that helps you understand where safety actually exists. You're no longer trying to be understood by everyone in the room. You're listening, watching, sensing, and this shift alone alters the power dynamic because attention, not reaction, is where real control lives. This is where you realize that distance can be an act of love toward yourself, that boundaries don't need to be loud to be effective, and that you don't owe access to people who only felt comfortable when you were diminished. As this awareness deepens, unresolved threads begin to surface. Questions you haven't answered yet. Like what happens when you stop playing your role entirely, who you become when guilt no longer dictates your decisions, and how far your life could expand if you stop negotiating your worth with people invested in keeping you small. You start to sense that this journey isn't about cutting people off impulsively, but about choosing proximity deliberately, about understanding that not everyone who shares your blood shares your values, your vision, or your capacity for growth. There is still tension here, unresolved, because clarity doesn't instantly solve relationships. It simply removes the fog, and what you do with that clarity is the real test, the one that requires patience, restraint, and a willingness to tolerate discomfort without retreating back into old patterns. You can feel the shift happening, slow and inevitable, a movement away from unconscious loyalty and toward conscious choice. And this choice will demand something from you, not action yet, but steadiness, the ability to hold your ground without needing validation. The story is not finished, not even close, because awareness is only the threshold, and beyond it lies a deeper reckoning, one that will challenge how you define love, loyalty, and power itself. There is a rhythm break that happens when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop trying to translate your inner world for people who only listen in order to correct it. And the silence that follows is not empty. It is charged, alive, and slightly dangerous, because it exposes what was hidden by noise for years. You notice how some relationships begin to wobble without your emotional labor propping them up, how conversations stall when you don't rescue them, how certain people seem unsure who they are around you now that you are no longer predictable. And this is not failure, it is revelation. You're no longer rushing to smooth discomfort, you let it breathe, and in that breathing space, truth emerges. Not always kindly, not always cleanly, But honestly, and honesty has a way of rearranging everything it touches. Suspense builds here because you can feel the cost of this shift approaching, the unspoken consequences of choosing yourself in a system that thrived on your compliance, and you know, somewhere deep inside, that not everyone will come with you into this next version of your life. This is where courage stops being loud and becomes quiet endurance, the ability to stand in your own clarity while others project confusion, anger, or disappointment onto you and not rush to fix it. Without realizing it, you begin modeling a different way of being, not through speeches or declarations, but through consistency, through the way you no longer react on cue, the way you choose your words carefully, the way you leave conversations that drain you without needing to justify your exit. Some people will feel inspired by this, drawn toward your steadiness, while others will feel threatened because your presence now reflects back to them what they've avoided facing. And reflection can feel like accusation to the unprepared. You don't announce your boundaries, you embody them, and embodiment is far more persuasive than explanation because it forces others to adjust or retreat, and either outcome serves your alignment. If you stay with this path, if you resist the urge to collapse back into old patterns for the sake of comfort, something profound happens. You begin attracting relationships built on choice rather than obligation, on respect rather than history. And this is where power quietly consolidates. Not power over others, but power within yourself. The kind that doesn't need permission, doesn't seek approval, and doesn't flinch when misunderstood, because you've learned that being misunderstood is often the price of being free. The most dangerous truth Machiavelli would whisper to you is this: betrayal hurts most when it comes from those who needed you to stay small, and freedom arrives the moment you stop negotiating your size to keep others comfortable. Click on the screen to watch the next video on how this knowledge changes what happens next, what most people never realize after this moment, and what you will start seeing differently from now on.